Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello, and thank you for tuning into the GSMC Relationship Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Giovanna, and I'm so happy that you have joined us today. This episode is going to be interesting because I am officially single. So everyone, I want to welcome you to the club, Moreover, I want you to welcome me to the club, I guess. I have big plans. They are sleeping. I do not want to date anyone unless you have a dual citizenship, so I can travel easier. Oh boy. Anyway, moving on. We're going to be talking about dating with a mental illness. This is something that is very important to me, and I did find some very interesting articles that were out there. I'm also going to be talking about lovesickness. It's actually a real physiological thing that you can experience. So I read an interesting article about that too. And then we're going to end with a very appropriate segment, which is what to do right after you've had a breakup. I have been single for 24 hours just about, so these are going to be the things that I have either already done or about to do. And it's good to do if you're going through a breakup. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is dating with a mental illness. Dating with a mental illness is hard, and there's actually been some studies about. The one I found, I wasn't really impressed with the sample size. Unfortunately, the sample size was only about 30 people. So that definitely could have been bigger, but it basically, this blog post that discusses that study is from Psychology Today, and yes, let's see, they were 35 people with severe mental illness. So that is going to include depression, anxiety, bipolar, and schizophrenia. So it's definitely a more severe, the study, they focused on people with more severe type of mental illness. And when you do have a mental illness, it's really hard to date because there's so much stigma behind it. And there's a lot of difficulties that come with having a mental illness. Now, say if you have a serious mental illness and that affects your ability to get a job or live in independent housing, that's going to be hard to try to find a person to date and to have a romantic relationship with. And it's not that people with mental illness don't want a relationship, because they definitely do. In the study, they interviewed a range of people with mental illnesses, like the ones that I had said before, and just to learn more about their dating and romantic experience. They found that only 15% of the participants were currently involved in a romantic relationship, and the rest almost unanimously stated that they strongly desired a satisfying and rewarding romantic relationship. So in the study, for the interviews, a lot of people kept repeating phrases like, it would be good to have a girlfriend, or it would be great to have a boyfriend, or I'm just tired of being alone, which just breaks my heart. And it really, I think a big issue with this is that, one, there's a stigma. You know, when you go on Tinder or dating apps like Bumble or anything like that, you know, they'll even say in the bios, like, no psychos or no crazies and stuff like that. And that is going to hurt either way. As someone who has struggled with mental health myself and take medications, this next part kind of, you know, made me sad. A woman expressed that she was dating someone and it was going really well, and she thought, you know, everything was going good. And the guy came over to her house and found her medications, and he just ghosted her. Like, she never heard of him again, and he just left. And so, yeah, it sucks because there definitely is a stigma behind mental illness. And also, with that stigma comes a stigma against dating people who have a mental illness. So the funny thing, though, in this article, they did talk about how if a date wasn't going well, the person would bring up their mental illness. Like, this woman said that, oh, whenever I didn't like the person, I would just bring up the fact that I had bipolar disorder, and then we'd never have a second date. And so it worked out. So I guess, you know, just use it if you got it, kind of thing. But yeah, it's hard for people with mental illness to achieve the goal of having someone in their life. And it's also really difficult too, where, a lot of people in this study had experienced, very messy breakups or had been in toxic relationships, which both of those things are really bad for your mental health. And so because of this, they just tended to avoid the dating world in general. But just because you don't want to date doesn't mean you don't want somebody in your life. It just, dating is really, really hard. And that's especially hard if you do have a mental illness. So if you're someone who struggles with that, I'm right here with you. I totally understand, you know, and I actually want to get into knowing when to tell the person that you're dating that you do have a mental illness. Personally, I try to tell someone in the beginning, because I don't want to have to deal with that attachment and then losing someone if they're not okay with that. I think for a lot of people, I am just very open about talking about mental health, so that's not something that I shy away from, but it can be hard if you're not that kind of person. And counseling and therapy has a really big stigma. So if you go to counseling early on in the relationship, you gotta make sure, you know, that the person, I don't know, at least I do. I want to make sure that the person knows, like, oh, yep, I'm in counseling and I do everything I can to keep myself healthy, and stable, you know, because you have to. But it really depends on your comfort in the situation. So as soon as you feel like you're starting to trust the person, if you feel like the relationship is at a spot where it is healthy, and you really have to look inward and say, is this a relationship that is going to keep getting better and keep being healthy? Or is this a relationship that you might see something going bad? And not to be pessimistic, but just to protect yourself, and put it out there that you are living with a mental illness, whether that is depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, anything. So for me, I do deal with depression, anxiety, and body dysmorphia. So it is something that I am pretty vocal about, especially recently. And I think doing this podcast has helped me do that. But you know, it's tough when you're dating because you want to make sure that, you know, the person isn't going to be someone who's going to look down on you for that, because they might have some different ideas in their head about, you know, what a mental illness is, and they may not know how to communicate with you effectively if you have a mental illness. And you know what, maybe it might be saving you some heartbreak, because if that person isn't willing to at least learn how to communicate and how to love someone with mental illness, it might not be the best relationship for you. And unfortunately, if you do have a mental illness, that does make the dating scene harder. But I bet you're going to have an even better person because when you do find a person, because you have been able to go through like a selection process, and all the weak ones will weed themselves out. So in that case, it is kind of helpful. The one thing though that they did talk about in this study and in this blog post discussing the study was there is a lot of career help for people with mental illness. And the reason why career programs for people who suffer from mental illness are so important is because there has been lots of study that shows that recovery is fostered when people with mental illness obtain and engage in normative social roles such as gainful employment. There are lots of programs out there that will help people with resume writing and interviewing skills and finding a job and all sorts of stuff. And it will help them get a job and become independent. Now, dating is the same thing. Having a relationship or having a boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever is also a normative social role. And if someone with a mental illness is able to experience that, it is going to feel more normal. It's going to feel like, they are not only their mental illness, which is a big thing in the peer support community. I had an internship working at a peer-run respite home. And basically a respite home is a place for people to go to avoid going to a hospital first. It's for mental health, and people are there to get on the right track and create a goal plan. And the thing with peer-run respite homes is it's all run by peers. So peers will develop goals and work with them, and they're not doctors or clinicians or psychiatrists or anything like that, but they are other people who have dealt with mental illness and may have gone through very similar things, so they can relate to the person who is coming into the house and to try to avoid having to get hospitalized. Because there's a lot of hospitalization programs that aren't great for someone who is having a mental breakdown, unfortunately. I'm sure that's not the case everywhere, but in many parts of at least the U.S., there's a lot of issues with hospitalizations. Now, in the peer-run community, it's really important to focus on that the mental illness is not the person. So the person is a whole being. When someone with a mental illness can experience getting a job and dating like, your average person, it's going to boost their self-esteem, and it's also going to help them foster growth and continue to work through their mental health and to become a happier person. Now, these career development places exist. So we've already done it, and it shows that it helps people with mental illness. Now, I'm thinking, and so is the study, after reading the study, they could do a help with dating. So it could be a supported dating intervention, just like supportive career intervention is also offered as well. Or supported employment. So you could have supported dating, which helps people with mental illness navigate societal norms and navigate dating, and maybe even as like a dating service or something, hook people up who are also experiencing the same mental illness. This article did talk a lot about how usually people who have mental illness are going to date people who also have a mental illness because they understand and they know where you're coming from. So it's easier for someone to avoid that stigmatization of mental illness because they are also experiencing it themselves. That makes quite a bit of sense to me, just because, they know what you're going through as well. But I would love to see something like this happen, some sort of supportive dating program, just like the career program and the employment programs that are offered across the country and across the world, I would assume. As I live in the U.S., so I'm not really sure if there are other different ways that people different things that people will use in other parts of the world. But yeah, I mean, I would hope that maybe this is something that more study can go into, and maybe someone can develop. And maybe that person is you. Hi. Anyway, guys, that's going to wrap up the first segment. In the second segment, we're going to be talking about what you need to know when you're dating and you might be mentally ill. And there's also, I'm going to have some tips too, if you are someone who isn't mentally ill and you are dating someone who is. So that is going to be in the next segment. We are going to pause for a quick sponsor break, and we'll be right back.
The GSMC Sex Podcast is a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. TSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet. Download the GSMC Sex Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you can find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
And welcome back. So in this segment, I just wanted to talk about, like, if you're someone who has mental illness, or you're someone who's dating someone with a mental illness, here are some tips to navigate dating and navigate romance and relationships and all sorts of things like that. I did want to talk about one thing, and it's basically about thinking about your mental illness and how it relates to you. I once had an internship in a peer-run respite home. And basically what a respite home is where people will check into a house if they're having a tough time. And typically people will check into this house to avoid getting hospitalized. Maybe they've been hospitalized in the past and it wasn't good for them, because for a lot of people with mental illness, sometimes hospitalization is not a great experience. For some people, it does work. I guess it also depends on the area that you're in, depending on the type of sources or resources that the hospital has that you would go to, whether that is on your own volition or not on your own volition. But with respite homes, you might sense yourself slipping back into a downslide, or maybe you feel yourself getting worse, and you'll go to a respite home. Now, a peer-run respite home is a place where there's no doctors, therapists, psychologists on the premises. It's only people who have experienced mental health issues and mental illness, and they're trained to help you get recovery, as they have gotten recovery. And working there as an intern, I did a lot of training that talked about how to think about your own mental illness. And a big thing in the peer circle is to talk about mental illness not as you are the mental illness, but you are a person with mental illness. So basically, your mental illness doesn't define you. You're a whole human person, and a whole human person is going to want a romantic relationship. Now, you're going to run into stigma if you are dating, especially with a serious mental illness, or really any mental health issue that you might be taking medication for or seeing a therapist for. You're going to run into people who don't understand that and might not be comfortable with that. So what you want to do is, if you run into people who, address you as a mental illness, just remember that you are a full person and you are not your mental illness. So basically that's the kind of the point with that. The other thing I wanted to talk about is that, it's scary to talk about your mental health, but honesty is going to be the best thing that you can do. Kind of like what I said in the last segment, it's really important to address your mental health illness when you see fit. For me, it's pretty close to the beginning when I'm talking to someone. I'll be like, listen, I'm on medication. I go to therapy. And if that's not something you're comfortable with, this isn't going to work out, So, but, for some people, it might be more difficult for them to talk about it. So I just recommend, when you start developing trust for this person, when you maybe might see this relationship going further, especially if you're just hooking up with people and just having like a friends with benefits kind of thing, it might not be as important to address a mental health, issue or something like that in the relationship. Now, when you start getting closer to someone, that's definitely when I would bring it up. Yeah, but if I'm just hooking up with someone, I don't think I would bring it up unless I'm like staying at their house or something and I have to like take my meds in the morning. That's when I talk about it. But yeah, I guess it depends on trust and it depends on your comfort level as well. So the big thing also in peer advocacy is making a plan for yourself when stuff is going to get bad, because stuff is going to get bad. And, so the hard moments are going to come, but you can always prepare yourself and you can always prepare the person that you're dating and the person that you're with, especially if it's in the beginning stages of the relationship. Now, this is why I like to talk about my mental health struggles and my mental health early on in the dating process, because I don't know when things are going to get bad. I don't know when I'm going to slip back into stuff. I don't know when my bad days are going to happen and stuff like that. And that's the other thing. Like, even if you're a person who's on medication, for example, I'm on SSRIs, you don't know, just because you're on medication, you can still have bad days. So when you're with someone, I like to develop a plan. This is very big in the peer advocacy group, where you have people who are going to be the person that you fall back on, whether that's friends, families, or partners. Now, for dating, you want to make sure that you are not using your partner as a 24/7 therapist. It's definitely like, of course you can talk to them and you can confide in them. But that's what a therapist is for. Your partner is not someone who is going to fix you. You can't rely on them for that. So all of that comes from inside. And I did talk a little bit about that in my podcast of Can You Love Yourself Before You Love Anyone Else, and self-love and things like that. So I still don't believe in that saying, but I do believe that your partner should not be your therapist. That's what your therapist is for. And if you don't have a therapist, I do highly recommend it. I'm on Medicaid, which is like the base of insurance plans. And, I've been able, sometimes it is tough, but I've been able to find, people, who take my insurance and I can get free stuff. There's also a lot of, therapists and counselors who do sliding scale payments and stuff like that. But by keeping your partner in the loop and telling them about your mental health illness, you might be able to construct a plan of what to do when you feel yourself starting to get bad again. Whether that is to the point of hospitalization or whether that is the point of just having a few days that are really out of whack. So by telling that person and by coming up with a plan before time, they're not going to be blindsided by a personality that they've never even seen before, specifically with personality disorders. If you're someone who has bipolar disorder or you're living with borderline borderline personality disorder. These are things to have a plan and to keep them in the loop so they're not completely like, whoa, where did this come from? This is nuts. So there's no fail-proof universal way to handle these moments, but at least you can prepare you and your partner with thinking about how to face these challenges together. So moving on, I think a lot of people view, I've talked about this a little bit before in previous episodes that I've done, thinking about how to, how equal the relationship is. So a lot of people will view relationship as 50-50. Now, if you have mental illness or if you have a mental illness, that might not always be true all the time. Sometimes there's going to be times where it's going to be 60-40. There might even be times where it's going to be 90-10. But the point is that it's not always 90-10 or it's not always 60-40. Whenever you can, try to make it as equal as possible. But especially if you're coming from someone who is dating someone with a mental illness, if you find that you are always on, the short end of the stick, you're always on that 10% side of the attention or the 30% side of the attention, always consistently, that is something to address. And like I said before, you are not their therapist. You are not, that is not your job to fix them. So if you feel like you are not getting enough attention a lot, that's something to address within the relationship. But just know that it might not always be equal sometimes. It's going to be like sliding scale. But as long as it's not always, that way, with the mental and a chronic mental illness, it's always going to be there, and sometimes stuff is going to fluctuate. And so even if you do have a mental illness, a healthy relationship is possible, but you might not have a traditional relationship where it's always going to be 50-50 all the time. The most important thing to remember that communication and honesty is key. So if you're constantly communicating about what you need in the relationship on both parties, that's going to lead to a more successful and happy relationship. So now I'm going to focus a little bit more on what if you're the person who is with someone or dating someone who has a mental illness. Now, the biggest piece of advice I can give you is to research how to communicate effectively with someone who has been diagnosed or who experiences a mental illness. There's a lot of resources online. If you're really serious about it, you can either join a help group even where you talk to other people who are in the same situation that you are. But mentally ill people are often erased from the conversation, and when they are in their time of struggle or if they're going through a rough time. So with you researching how to communicate with someone, it's really going to help them bounce back. If you know how to effectively talk to someone who has depression, effectively communicate with someone who has anxiety, borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, it's really going to help them see that they are understood and seen and listened to, especially by someone who they love a lot. And even if you're just dating, having someone there to understand them is really, really important. So I think that's the biggest piece of advice that I can give you is just Google, how to communicate with someone who has depression. And just leave it at that. Read some articles, read some blog posts. There are really great resources online. And we have a whole expansion of things that we have access to. And your job is not to fix them. Your job is not to create a plan for them. Your job is to communicate honestly and efficiently about your needs to them. But your job is not to fix their problems. They are going to have to see their therapist. They are going to have to take medication, create a plan for when things do get bad, for a relapse, for anything like that. That is all on them. And you can help them, of course. I have always offered, with people I'm with or people I'm friends with or whatever, I will drive you to your therapy appointment and I'll sit in the waiting room. Like, I don't care. I'll bring a book, so as long as you're there with support, and you are a listening ear and without judgment, I think that's really important. But it is something that you really need to create boundaries within the relationship of what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. And I did kind of talk about a little bit in an episode during a top 10 section talking about how to create boundaries. And the number one thing with creating boundaries is communicate what you need and what you're comfortable with. But as long as you really care about this person and you want to at least try, I think that is what matters the most. But yeah, hang in there. There's a lot of support groups out there, and do a quick Google search or do something that, resources in your area. Even, most places are going to have some resources. They might be a drive away, but, now in the time of COVID, the good thing that's coming up is there's a lot of remote stuff. There's a lot of remote counseling that you can do. And yeah, and you don't have to be mentally ill yourself to see a counselor. I highly recommend counseling for everyone. I think that, it should be just as normal as going, for a checkup at a doctor, a yearly checkup. I mean, we should all have a counselor that we just go to, every 6 months or every 12 months or something, just to check in and, have a session. So yeah, and that's something that you can bring to your counselor. Like, listen, I need help. Because I'm dating someone who is mentally ill and I really care about them and I want to stay with them, but I just need some pointers and some tips. So yeah, those are my big suggestions if you're someone who's dating someone with a mental illness. That we're going to take a break right now though, and but when we come back from the commercial, I'm going to be talking about what lovesickness is. There's a really cool article in Bustle that talks about it, and it's actually a physiological experience. So, stay tuned and we'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back. So I found an article. I misspoke at the end of the last segment. It was published in She Knows, and the article is called "Being Lovesick Isn't Just an Old Saying. It's a real thing. And it was written by Casey McCoy. It was republished on July 8th of 2020. Looks like the original publication was February 2014. But basically it talks about how love sickness, if that's something that you're feeling, for a crush or, after a breakup or anything like that, it's a real thing. And it actually has to do with a lot of hormones that are going around in your brain, and it can actually, be equated to a mental illness, like, or addiction or something like that. So you're not being melodramatic, basically. According to this article, love sickness isn't just about the feelings of romance, sadness, and longing. The condition contains elements of intrusive thoughts, obsession, impulsiveness, and delusions that some experts think mimic mental illness, according to Huffington Post. If you're feeling lovesick, at the moment, or you have felt lovesick before for whatever reason, it is a process in the brain that has to do with a lot of hormones that are bouncing around in your brain. So you might find that you feel elated and in love and you feel so good, but you also feel terrible. All at the same time. And that's what love does to us basically as humans. And the reason why this happens is because a lovesick brain basically has serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. And each of those trigger a really strong emotional and physiological response. And the mixture of all of those chemicals and hormones in your brain produces emotional, mental, and physical symptoms that are simultaneously awesome and terrible all at the same time. So it's really confusing and not that pleasant, but pleasant at the same time. Because of all of those chemicals in the brain, we get obsessive, we check Instagram, we check, also social media and stuff. We think about them all the time, and it's constant. And so you're gonna feel lonely, but you're also gonna feel like you're in love, and it's just a confusing time altogether. So according to this article, some symptoms of being lovesick will include idealization of the other person's characteristics. That is going to be positive or negative. So if you think about all of the amazing things and you blow them completely out of proportion, or you take the negative things that they do and also focus on those immensely as well. You're also going to experience intrusive thoughts. So you might be at work or doing chores or just minding your own business, and then boom, there it is. All of a sudden you're just thinking about your beloved, and you just can't get it out of your head. A sense of euphoria in response to real or perceived signs of reciprocation. Oh my gosh. That is from the article. But basically, you think that because, maybe they liked your post, or, maybe they text you back, or opened a Snapchat, whatever it is. A lot of this is social media related. But if maybe you're talking to them and you're flirting with them, and maybe they say something that, oh, maybe they do love me, or maybe they do want me back. And all of that stuff is going on in your head. The next one is fantasy. You daydream about your love interest, even when it negatively impacts your job performance. Alternatively, you make up entire scenes with your love interests that aren't based on reality. You'll just be at work and you're just planning something with the beloved one. Maybe you're thinking about a date, or you're thinking about the future with them. But it might not be in reality. They might not like you back, or, they might just not want that. But, you're going to daydream about them constantly, and it's going to distract you from the things that you need to do in your life. And all of that is actually a big, thing with mental illness, because mental illness is normal traits, but abnormally. So I've kind of discussed this before, but basically it's everyone experiences symptoms of depression and anxiety, and everyone experiences these symptoms. But when they become abnormal once they start to become intrusive, once they start to disrupt your everyday living, once they disrupt your relationships and your work and your school and everything that you got going on, that's when it becomes abnormal and you can't stop it. And that's when you might have some sort of underlying mental illness or something like that, when it makes it hard for you to live an everyday normal life. That's when it becomes abnormal. And basically that's what lovesickness is, and why they had said in the earlier part, the first half of the article, why it may mimic mental illness. So bringing it all together. So the next one is going to be self-doubt. You fear rejection from your love interest so much that you question yourself and you feel unbearably shy in his or her presence. So yeah, you're going to start feeling that weird, especially I feel like this is big for like a crush. Like maybe, I talked about an article, in a previous podcast about a woman who is falling in love with her friends, and it's really tough to deal with that. I feel like that might happen a lot especially when you have a crush on someone, but, they don't feel the same way with you. And that's the point when I would recommend to step away from the relationship and move away a little bit, so you can go through the process of, almost like breaking up in your head, but so, you don't have this feeling of weakness, which is the next one, is you lose strength in your knees and legs when you think about him or her and have trouble controlling your shaking hands in his or her presence. Now, this also goes back to these hormones that are happening in your brain are going to have physiological representations in your body. So, the fact that all of this hormones and all of these chemicals that are bouncing around in your brain, it's going to show up in your body. Like, we are connected humans. Like, our mind is connected to our body and our body connected to our mind. So our brain, though, likes to sabotage us sometimes because shaky hands and, sweaty palms and mom spaghetti, it'll all come up, it will all present itself in its body, and it's going to be hard to get away from, unfortunately. So insomnia is the next one, and that's because, you're constantly thinking about that person, so the intrusive thoughts start to come back in. And you have a heightened sensitivity to your emotions and fear. And anxiety. You experience heart palpitations, flushing in your cheeks and shaking. And you fear the worst possible outcome will happen from your infatuation with a person. So, you might feel like you're going to get your heart broken, or you just might second guess yourself, and you're constantly thinking about this person, and that's why you can't sleep, because also anxiety affects your sleeping as well. So it all goes together. You're going to have trouble maintaining romantic intensity through adversity. You're going to experience physical symptoms such as trembling, flushing, weakness, and heart palpitations around the other person that connected to anxiety. You're going to arrange your schedule to maximize possible encounters with the other person. Yeah, I think too, with social media, this makes it easier because, they might post where they're going to be, or they might post pictures of where they are now, and you're like, I kind of do want to go out tonight maybe, and maybe I'll see them. So you think about their schedule and when you will be able to see them and stuff like that. So yeah, that can quickly become very healthy and scary for the other person. And lastly, you will endlessly analyze every word and gesture to determine their possible meaning. This will also go towards text messages. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, they sent LOL and a smiley face. Like, that must mean this. So you're going to analyze every single letter, every single look, every single word. And that's just going to, again, make your anxiety worse, and it's going to make the love sickness worse. And actually, there are possible health outcomes to love sickness. When you're in this constant state of anxiety and heightened emotions, it's going to affect your blood pressure, and it puts people at greater risk for heart disease, strokes, headaches, and chronic pains. Because of the insomnia, you're not sleeping well, the intrusive thoughts, all of this is connected to major depression. And if this is constantly happening to you and the hormones in your brain are just uncontrollable, it's going to lead to depression and anxiety. Maybe more prominent, maybe even after you get rid of the love sickness. You can fix that with medication and therapy and things like that. But you don't want to have serious health outcomes, because of love sickness. So some ways to deal with that, especially on the days that are really bad, try to reduce your stress. You're going to want to breathe. And what I always do is I breathe in through my nose for 5 seconds, hold for 5 seconds, and out for 5 seconds. And I do that like 3 to 5 times. And that has been proven to just put you in relax your thoughts, calm your thoughts. And I also pair that with visualization. So when I breathe into my nose, I picture like this wave cleaning out my brain of all of the intrusive thoughts. So I breathe in, and there's a wave washing over, like the crown of my head on the inside, and it crashes down on the back. And then I hold, and when I'm holding, that wave is coming in and doing its cleaning work. And then when I breathe out, I picture all of those intrusive thoughts and all of that bad self-talk coming out of my mouth. And I do that 3 to 4 times, and I visualize the inside of my head getting like squeaky clean and like sparkling. I don't know if that might work for you. Hopefully it does. But I really like breathing, and visualization is just great. I love it. You're going to want to set boundaries for yourself. If you have a problem stalking their social media pages, there are now timers on a lot of social media apps that will turn off at a certain time. So like, okay, 9 p.m., 10 p.m., whatever time you want to do, the app turns off and you go to sleep, and that's it. So you can, sure, if you want to stalk someone, but set a timer on the app and it turns off. And so that is going to help you distance yourself, especially if you just spend the entire day checking their social media. So after, if you only want to spend an hour, or 2 hours on Facebook or on Instagram or whatever, after an hour or 2 hours, when you reach your limit, the app will lock itself. And the last thing is, if you're experiencing love sickness in a relationship, or should I say an unhealthy relationship, it's time to remove yourself from that relationship. So there's going to be people who are going to not show love, not have effective communication. They're going to withhold love from you and withhold affection for you as maybe a form of punishment. And you're going to feel love sickness from that. So if that is the case, that is a form of emotional abuse and manipulation. So that is time to exit that relationship, because it's not healthy and you're going to keep experiencing love sickness. And that isn't fun for anybody. But anyway, that is going to finish off this segment. Stick around though, because in the next segment, I'm going to be talking about 10 things to do directly after you experience a breakup. Anyway, we're going to pause for a sponsor break, and we'll be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
So you just got dumped, or you just dumped somebody else. What are you going to do within the next 72 hours, within the next week, directly after you have broken up? So the first one is going to be delete and throw away reminders. You want to distance yourself from that person so you're not constantly thinking of them, or else you will lead to more love sickness, kind of like what we talked about in the last episode. And by doing that, you're going to want to delete pictures of them from your photo reel. You're going to want to get rid of gifts or items that make you think of them, maybe things that they have given you. All of that. You want to get rid of it. Clean up your social media of them, and just so you don't have that constant reminder of them. And you don't have to constantly see them, think about them, all that kind of stuff. You want to distance yourself from that relationship so you don't have to deal with that love sickness longer than you have to, because you are going to feel pretty bad the first a month or so, but you want to make that time as short as possible. The next thing you're going to want to do is to distance yourself from the relationship. So, going back to cleaning up your social media, you're going to want to get rid of pictures of you and them on your social media. You don't want that reminder. You're going to want to distance yourself from the relationship. If you feel like if you don't distance yourself from that relationship, and also physically, let's say, God forbid, you work with them, oh boy, try to figure out if maybe there's a different shift that you can come in, or maybe you don't have to be near them, just physically distancing yourself is really important too. If you guys live together, try to get out of that apartment or home as soon as possible, because it's gonna be toxic and it's gonna be uncomfortable. It's just not an ideal place to be. So distance yourself not only emotionally from the relationship, but also physically. Because if you have that constant reminder of them, you're not going to be able to move on. You really aren't going to. So try to find a way to figure out how to remove yourself from the relationship. The next one is going to be call a friend. Literally the day I broke up, I FaceTimed my best friend. She lives in a different state from me and 2 time zones over, and I FaceTimed her for an hour and 30 minutes. And we just kind of talked and we caught up on life, and I tell you what, it made me feel so much better. If you can talk to a friend, if you can talk to a family member, absolutely do that. Right now it's tough with COVID, but if you're in a place where that's safe to do so, go to a open air bar and sit outside. A lot of places now have outside seating. Sit outside, have a drink with a friend, practice safe social distancing and wear a mask. But yeah, even if you can spend time with a friend, do that. Like I said, my best friend lives on the other side of the country. So yeah, I just FaceTimed her, and just doing that made me feel so much better. So if you can spend time with family and friends, or even just give them a call and talk to them, that's a great thing to do, and I highly recommend. Number 4, don't start dating immediately. Oh my goodness. Do not download Tinder and Bumble and Hinge at the day of. Don't. Take the time to just be by yourself and to recover from that, from breakups and things like that. And also figure out who you see yourself with. If you even want to start dating, if you're, I don't know, but if you still want to date, in the future, figure out who really you want to see yourself with. And especially if it was a unhealthy relationship, figure out what happened, where you got there. Examine, some of the things that you liked and some of the things that you didn't like, and try to incorporate that, in your new, ideas of who you see yourself with and who you think you'll actually be compatible with. Just try to figure out what you need for yourself. Take this time to enjoy it. Take this time to do the things that you want to do. And, you don't have to worry about, other people. You have no, now you don't have anything stopping you from doing whatever you want. So number 5, take time for yourself. Whether that is, so now you're going to have this newfound time, so take time to, see friends more, take the time to maybe start a new workout routine, take the time to learn something new that you've been wanting to try, and focus on bettering yourself, and, put all that energy that you would have put into a relationship and put it back into yourself. That's the best type of investment that you can do, because it's always going to pay off, whether that is immediately or in the future. If you invest time and energy into yourself, you're going to see improvements, and other people are going to see improvements. Especially if you are consistent with the investing that you're doing on yourself, and just think about the things that you want to do and that with the changes that you would like to see in your life. And the next thing is plan things that you couldn't do in the relationship. Do you want to move to a different city? Do you want to travel? Do you do things that you couldn't do before? Now, what was the movie? Like How to Be Single? It is more of a chick flick, but she moved to, she got an apartment on her own, and it was her first time, being on her own. She had to navigate how to be single and how to be by yourself. And, but there's a lot of good that can come from that. Work on developing deeper relationships and better relationships with their friends. And therefore that's going to help you develop better and more healthy relationships, for future partners and future people that you're going to be with. Plan some things that you couldn't do, no matter what that is. But moving on. Go on a road trip. I feel like road trips are so fun. I'm a big proponent of, as I've said before, of solo travel and doing things by yourself. Right now, it seems like road trips are the only thing that you can do. I am way too nervous about flying at the moment, because of COVID. But depending on where you are, you might be able to travel within your state, or you might be able to travel. So, for example, I live in the Northeast, and so there's a lot of states in the Northeast that, for example, New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Vermont, Connecticut, Maine, they have formed a travel coalition. So I can actually travel freely within those states. So who knows? I might just go on a road trip. I don't know. Do a road trip for yourself. Especially if you can take the time off of work, even if it's just for the weekend on if you have 2 days off in a row. Go hiking, and that is a very safe, socially distanced thing to do if you go hiking, especially if you do it on your own. Big proponent of solo travel. You learn so much about yourself. You gain so much confidence. I could not recommend it enough. If you need someone to tell you to just go on that trip, it is me. I'm telling you to do it. And if you need more advice on that, please message me, because love solo travel. Anyway, number 8, pamper yourself. Get your hair cut, get a massage, get a facial, get your nails did. Go shopping, do something. But take the time to take care of yourself. And it doesn't have to be cosmetic, I guess. It can be drink more water, eat food that makes you feel good. Maybe not so much in the moment, but eating 3 plates of, fried goodness will make you feel good at the moment, but afterwards in a few hours, you're going to feel gross. So maybe I wouldn't recommend doing that, but just take care of yourself and be kind and patient with yourself, basically. So pampering doesn't have to go just with like getting a facial and getting a massage, or something like that. And like, if you're a guy too, they have like guy facials that you can get, and your skin is just going to feel soft. And also, dudes can get manicures and pedicures. Like, don't even come at me with those gender norms, okay? Like, so if, they have manicures, which, whatever. I think it's funny. I think it's cute. But yeah, I mean, if you need to call them a manicure, then, cause you're a man and you want to get a pedicure, do your thing. You don't have to get nail polish, but if you do want to get nail polish, hell yeah, boy, do your thing. Get some sassy nail polish on there. Black nail polish is always great, no matter what gender you are, or non-binary. Like, get your nails did, pamper yourself. Okay, so, number 9, get a counselor, talk to a professional. It's so important to talk about, what you've been going through, and especially for a breakup, it's, you have to grieve that relationship and to get over it. So talk to a counselor, talk to a professional. It's going to make you feel better. And I think my biggest selling point for counseling and therapy, I talk about all the time, but they are literally paid to listen to you complain. As someone who loves to talk, obviously, or else I wouldn't have a podcast, therapy is my favorite thing ever, because they are literally there to hear all of my problems and talk to me about them. And they're paid to do it. So I don't feel guilty about putting that like on my friends, because like sometimes, I said to call a friend, which you absolutely should. But if you keep talking about your ex with your friends constantly for like weeks and months and however long, they're going to get tired of it. But your therapist, they're paid to listen to you talk about that. So go to a therapist. Highly recommend. So my last one is going to be make a 6 months plan. What do you see yourself in 6 months? I am someone where it's really hard for me to like make a 5-year plan. It's a lot more easier for me to make a 6-month plan, because 6 months is something that you can like see yourself. And, if you make 6-month plans, every 6 months, you're going to start seeing small, improvements in your life, because you're doing it in small increments. And those goals are going to be more attainable. Of course, they have to be smaller goals because you only have 6 months. So it kind of forces you to work in a box, and it forces you to get those small goals that you want for yourself and complete them. So if your small goal is to get a better job, if your small goal is to start a workout plan, if it's to take an online class, if it's to start looking for apartments, start a savings account, whatever it is, it's a 6-month plan. It's not going to be a huge sweeping change in your life, but maybe it is. If you're at a spot where you can finally make that step into a bigger change, put that in your 6-month plan. But don't make a huge plan that is unattainable. Yet it has to be realistic, or else you're just going to put yourself down because you weren't able to achieve your goals. So try to do goals that you can achieve in 6 months, and don't put too much on your plate, because that's just going to stress you out and disengage you. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you guys liked it. This is definitely one where, please, give us a like on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, GSMC_podcast. On Facebook, if you just search GSMC podcast. We're on Twitter. And you can also go to the website, and check out all of the other cool shows. There is a travel podcast. There is a book review podcast. There's a sex podcast. There's so many things. There's like 40 different podcasts on this freaking network. It's crazy. So yeah, check that out. Especially if you like this show, check out some of the other shows. You can also follow my personal pages and go to my website, which is giovannaacardino.com. And yeah, you can interact with me on the social medias. Also, you can subscribe and rate and review the podcast. That would mean so much to me and everyone else. So yeah, please do. And also, oh my gosh, I almost forgot. I wanted to welcome Stephanie. So Stephanie is a new host for the Relationship Podcast. I love it because she has she's able to talk about a different point of view. Her most recent episode came out Friday on bachelorettes and wedding planning. She also just did an episode on strengthening relationships during a pandemic. That was like her debut episode. So yeah, please download and listen to her stuff as well. And all of that, if you subscribe to us on Apple iTunes, you're gonna get automatic. They're just gonna show up right in your feed. So yeah, check her out. She's a really cool lady. I haven't talked to her like in person, but I bet we would be friends. Anyway, I hope you guys like this episode, and yeah, please do all those things. Follow us on Facebook and all that stuff, and I will talk to you guys next week. Bye!
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.